Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy and I am the host of the program. We have discussed over the course of many shows how executors should deal with real estate that must go through probate. And in a recent show, we discussed the issues that often confront a beneficiary who has inherited real estate. In considering your options in selling real estate, whether as an executor or as a beneficiary, one possibility is to sell to what we call a cash buyer. Some of you are likely to say that is not a good idea because you will get less for your property. And that may be true if you just consider the gross sales price. But you also have to consider all the costs you incur that make the property presentable for sale, plus realtor fees, closing fees, and much more. Our show tonight will examine when and why a sale to a cash buyer may be the best course of action. We are pleased to have with us today two local firms that are actively involved in the cash purchase of real estate, both from estates and heirs of an estate. They will share with us their experiences in such transactions and guide us through this discussion. Our first guest is the CEO of Quick Home Buyers in Fairfax County Company, which buys and sells houses in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. Over the last 33 years, he has been a party to thousands of real estate cash purchases. In addition, over the years, he has taught many investors at seminars in the D.C. area how to buy properties for cash. Our second guest is the broker and the owner of DSA Properties and Investments. DSA Properties buys, lists, flips, renovates, and builds real estate throughout Metro DC. Please welcome Ed Rooney from Quick Home Buyers and Dia Awadallah from DSA Properties and Investments. Fellas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you guys taking the time to both help me prepare for the show and also to come and answer a few questions. So let's take a look at this. Ed, let's talk about, just kind of get people familiar with cash buyers is. Let's start with what motivates the cash buyer?
Buying a property below market. In other words, if the property is not in real good condition and it needs a lot of fixing up, it's difficult for the people to list the property because it needs to be inspected by the lender. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's when they call us. Okay.
Now, how can the seller determine if a cash buyer, so I'm looking for a cash buyer, how can I tell if someone's really a bona fide purchaser?
That's a good question. You can check, see if they have a website.
Okay.
If they're listed with the Better Business Bureau.
Sure.
Have any complaints on the Better Business Bureau website. Also, you want to ask for a proof of funds.
I know you mentioned that, to make sure they actually have the money to close the transaction.
Yes, because there are investors who might bring a letter from what's called a hard money lender, but most of the time that means it needs to be inspected by his appraiser, and it might be turned down.
Okay.
A real cash offer comes with proof of funds from the bank.
Gotcha.
In their account.
And how about if somebody, it is important if they want an extended study period? Is that a consideration as well?
What's a lot of investors do, they're not buying the property themselves. They've gone to some seminars to teach them how to wholesale, which means if I was to buy your house, say I gave you $1 million for your house, and then I take that contract and I put in there a study period of a week, 15 days, or 3 months of settlement, most likely I'm shopping your contract and going to sell it for $10,000 or whatever I can get. Okay? Now, if someone wants to assign it to someone else, well, that's fine if they have proof of funds and they put up a substantial deposit. So if they don't settle, you keep the deposit.
Gotcha. So that's a way for us to tell who we got a real bona fide person. Now, how could I find a cash buyer?
You can go to Google,
a
real estate agent, real estate agent, Google, or
hard money lenders. Hard money lenders.
Well, but that'd be difficult to go that way. They get a TV advertising, flyers in the mail.
Okay. Now, what questions should I ask a cash buyer who I might be considering to do business with?
How quickly can he settle? Again, proof of funds.
Right.
The big thing again on the contract is non-refundable deposit if he does not settle. If they ask for that inspection period, be leery of that.
Okay. We want to talk about why to sell to a cash buyer. So what are the benefits to me as a seller to sell to a cash buyer? What are some of the benefits?
Yeah, I think your number one benefit is going to be you're not going to do any repairs. So you don't have to worry about financing, as far as a bank lending So ultimately, getting any kind of repairs done, cash buyer will get you to the finish line at a discount, but none of those worries. That's your ultimate.
So if I have a mortgage that I'm not making my mortgage payment for the next 3 or 4 months while the property is listed for sale, so I save that money.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Another thing with a cash buyer, you can get to the table much sooner. So you're not going to go through your typical process, 30 days, 45 days. As long as the cash buyer has the cash in the account, they can close, as soon as title is ready. So I've had it 72 hours.
And some cash buyers, will actually move you from your house or pay to dispose of your property, and they take on that cost.
Yeah. There's cash buyers out there that accommodate to try to make the transaction as simple as possible.
Sure. Now, what are the negatives of selling to a cash buyer?
So the ultimate negative is you're not going to get market value. If you do the repairs, if you get it to financeable condition, and then a little bit more, you're gonna coop. Ultimately you're going to get the best bang for your buck on the back.
It makes a little bit more money, but there's a
Correct.
time associated with that too.
Yeah. So it really depends if you have the time.
Okay. So Ed, let's turn to actually how the cash buyer sale works. So how does this sale to a bona fide cash buyer work? So let's just start me through the process slowly.
We speak to a potential seller.
Right.
We ask them questions about the property. How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how many levels, parking, no parking. And then we look at the numbers of what is sold in that neighborhood remodeled. It's called ARV, after remodeled value. All most investors care about are 2 things, not tax assessment and not appraisal. That's for a homeowner appraisal, okay? We care about what it's worth when it's finished, the ARV, and then what are the repairs, 50 or 150. And that's how we come up with the offer.
Okay, so will most cash buyers typically inspect the house?
Yes.
Okay. Because they need to figure out what work
The
needs to be
repairs,
done
are they
and
50
figure
or
out.
150?
Sure. So once they've done their research, inspected the house, what do they come up with? What's next? They come up with a value?
Well, normally they should have run the numbers before they got there, what that ARV is, okay?
Right.
And that's why I mentioned inspection period. If they come there with their contractor, they look at it and they need 5 or 6 days, why? It only takes 24 hours at the most usually, unless it's a huge job, to come up with the offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dee, let's talk about actually establishing the cash offer. We've kind of talked a little bit about that, but how does the cash buyer actually come up with a price to pay for the property?
So as Ed mentioned, it's the ARV. Essentially what you want to do is purchase the property at a price that leaves you enough profit at the end. So hypothetically, if the property is worth $500,000 renovated, it needs about $100,000 worth of work. You want to try to purchase it around $300,000, and then after renovations, you'll be in it for about $400,000 after you sell it realtor fees. So it gives you a good percentage on the back, and ultimately that's a way to establish what the property's worth to the cash buyer.
Okay, so I think it's really important. Again, we want to make sure it's clear that I think Ed, you mentioned that it doesn't really matter what the house appraised for. That doesn't really matter, 'cause that's for a bank. Okay, and it doesn't really matter, what Zillow says or anything like that. I mean, it really is what is it going to be able to sell for after you fix all the repairs. Now, does it matter what the tax assessed is?
No.
So again, these are things people would point to and say, well, my tax assessment says the word X, and you're only offering me 75% of X, and that's because?
It's irrelevant, correct.
I gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about how we would actually structure the contract. We've come to the conclusion, here's our value that we're willing to offer, and we've extended that offer. So there's an agreement on cash price. So how is the contract to purchase typically structured?
It's as is condition at the time.
Now that's
okay?
important. People understand this.
Yes.
No repairs.
No repairs, nothing at all. No repairs. Pay 100% of closing, including both sides of the transfer and recordation taxes. In DC, that can be 3% for both sides. Then when you sell it, another 1.5%. Okay? So by the time an investor buys a property, he's almost at 12% in DC, Maryland, with the transfer and recordation, paying the agent when he sells it, okay? and then paying his settlement charges, everything when he purchases the property, and then half when he sells it. So people don't realize that. They think if you buy a house for 100, it's worth 200 renovated. They put 50 into it. You make 50,000 profit. Nothing's further from the truth.
Sure, sure. Now we'll show a little bit later on that little. I know you guys worked up a nice little spreadsheet that shows the
Right.
different transaction costs. But is the contract normally have a non-refundable deposit?
Mine has a non-refundable deposit of $10,000. I understand there are some that are 500 or 1,000. Well, an investor can walk away from that and not be hurt. What's $500 or 1,000? 10,000 is a little different. Now, sometimes put up 25,000, all depending if the seller or the attorney for the seller would like a larger deposit.
So what you're telling me, though, is that if there's a significant cash deposit that's non-refundable, what that articulates and conveys is that we have a serious buyer.
A serious buyer says, in my contract, I have no way out either. We're both locked in.
Okay.
Inspection period or subject to is a weasel clause, and that means they can walk away for any reason they want.
Sure, and I understand that. Now, title work needs to get done. Now, do you normally suggest that, I mean, we normally tell clients when they're going to sell real estate that they really ought to get title work done before they even start working on that, just to see if there's any problems in advance, so that way we can avoid that problem. So I would pass that along to our viewers. How fast can someone normally expect in the contract for closing to take place when they're selling to a
We can
cash
close
buyer?
as quickly as 3 days. All we do is call the abstractor, does the title work. We call him directly instead of going through the settlement company, who's got a huge stack on their desk to get done. And we pay extra for a rush. And then he sent it over. You wire the money to the title company, and that's it.
But most cash buyers, if they're serious, will close in a very short period of time.
Yeah, at the most 2 weeks usually.
Okay. And again, of course, the big thing is that we talked about that when we get the HUD-1, there's a buyer's side and a seller's side to the HUD-1. There are
Right.
charges that are normally assigned to the seller, and what a normal cash buyer situation is going to be is all those items get pushed onto the buyer's side.
And what I tell the sellers is the HUD-1, which is the settlement sheet, I said at the top is money from purchaser and money from seller. I said your side, so they understand, is zero from top to bottom if there's no mortgage or no liens and no back taxes.
And I think that's helpful to understand that. Let's talk about some of the things to watch out for when we're dealing with cash buyers. So what should I be watching out for when I'm talking to a potential cash buyer? What are the things that I should be a red flag for me?
I think ultimately just make sure the cash buyer can prove that they have the means to close, essentially proof of funds, any kind of assets that are liquid so they can perform in a timely manner. You've got cash buyers, any cash buyer that wants to drag the contract out, that's probably something you want to steer away from. And if it's a true cash buyer and their intentions are to perform, close on the asset, as Ed mentioned, 2 weeks is reasonable. Anything sooner is ideal.
Now, should I be concerned, do I ever expect to be paying an application fee of any kind?
No.
Okay, so that should be a red flag if
Yeah,
someone wants
red
to.
flag. Any fees associated with the cash buyers is probably a red flag.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
You guys are in the business.
Yeah.
And should I be concerned if the person who is my prospective buyer doesn't want to come see the house?
Yes.
Because you have to figure what they have to improve, right?
A cash buyer ultimately needs to see the asset they're purchasing, do an inspection, and any of those things, as Ed mentioned, that cash buyer should have a good high EMD to show that they're serious, something that they won't walk away from. Make sure there's not a clause in there that allows the cash buyer to assign the contract, and ultimately perform within 2 weeks.
Yeah, those are contract-related issues, definitely.
Yeah.
So what about should I be concerned if the prospective buyer only wants to communicate by email?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, if it's a true bona fide cash buyer, they should be able to communicate phone, person, text, email.
But they should definitely come see the property.
Alt-
In most
yes.
cases, I understand there are some exceptions
Yeah.
to that rule, but in most cases you want.
Any property you're really interested in purchasing, you'll be there within the time.
Sure.
So definitely seeing it, yes.
Okay, let's talk about then some of the common problems that you guys who have been doing this for many years. Yeah, what are some of the common problems that arise in the course of a cash transaction that cause things to come off the rails?
Well, you make an offer, and then someone comes in behind you. They see what your offer is, and they want to offer more. And then
Happens, yeah, I'm
and
sure.
then the seller wants to cancel the contract, okay? Because why couldn't you beat anybody's offer by $1,000 or $2,000? You know, when you're putting up $500,000 or $1 million to buy a property.
Sure.
Okay, so you have a spread there. So the seller's job is to get the most they can, investors get it as low as they can, and meet in the middle, hopefully somewhere.
Sure. So other problems that might arise, I mean, I know that you talked about people having unrealistic opinions about value.
Yeah.
Causes the things to come off the rails.
Especially on probate properties, okay? When you have heirs that live out of state or even in state. They have a number they need or a number they want, nothing to do with the value is. And then they see what a house sold down the street for, remodeled for maybe $500,000. Their house needs $150,000 of work, but they want $500,000.
Right.
And you have to take them through it slowly and explain to them the whole process.
Sure. And I think that's the part of the education we're trying to convey in the course of these types of shows, and especially from you guys, is to make sure that people have a realistic understanding about what to expect,
right,
and to be realistic,
right,
okay, and be grounded, okay. So have you ever had any problem with people being emotional and not wanting to give up the property even though they might have signed a contract and then they won't sign the deed?
Well, sometimes there's a lot of emotion involved. Some people don't want their house torn down. If it's a tear down, they want you to remodel instead of tear it down. Mm-hmm. And that is a problem when there are several heirs in a probate. Some are very emotional and they just don't want to let it go. And they're paying taxes on it. No one's living there most of the time.
Yeah.
You know?
I actually confronted that with the property where one of the kids had mentioned that was an emotional thing, which he finally had gotten over.
And then sometimes they want to rehab it, but they've never rehabbed a property and they don't really understand. Okay, first of all, find a contractor you can trust who doesn't take the 1/3 up front and run. He's robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Sure.
And then you've got to do the shopping, you've got to fix the house, on and on and on.
Sure, sure. So these are good things. Well, let's turn to talk about lessons learned. Okay, again, what are some of the lessons you've learned in your years as a cash buyer?
As a cash buyer, any problems that come up, just be upfront. You know, clear any issues that you have, work them out front, and see if you can come to some kind of solution. Because ultimately, you know, it can be resolved, and you can move forward and purchase the home.
Okay. How about I know that you guys had mentioned the importance of educating the seller early about how we can arrive at value,
right,
why the value is what it is, what it costs to fix this property, and why, again, goes to how we get to the cash offer. So we have to figure out that after repaired value or renovated value.
Yeah, we take with us when I go to the home, I take the file of all the comparables in the neighborhood that like that house that sold what they sold for. And then I explain to them, this is the cost, the transfer recordation that I pay, so on, the agent's fee, you know, have to make a profit, and so on. So we take them through it.
Sure. I know we're going to show up on the screen, though. I know that, Ed, you guys have put together a little presentation, or at least it shows VA, Virginia, DC, and Maryland properties. If I sold a house for $250,000, the different costs associated with that transaction. But I've also added to that things you have to also consider when you figure out what you're actually getting. And so there are property fix-up costs you're not paying. You know, there's decorator allowances you're not paying, which are very common in transactions. There's moving costs that you pay, you know, that you'd have to pay otherwise, that typically a lot of cash buyers will pay to move you. You know, if you have furniture of the house, you're going to have to dispose of that. And if someone is a cash buyer, a lot of times they'll bear that cost to move that out. And if you're sitting around for 3 or 4 or 5 months, you may have a mortgage. You got to make mortgage payments.
Can I say most cash buyers don't move you?
Is that true?
No, they don't.
That's important to know.
We pack them and we move them anywhere in the nation for free.
So it's important to ask that question.
Yeah,
okay.
question.
So I didn't.
And do they come in and pack?
Well, I mean, those are all considerations. I understand that. That's important to know. But I guess the point to our viewers is that when you look at, I think if we're looking at, you know, selling the house retail versus selling it to a cash buyer, that I think you have to compare apples to apples as far as what you net.
Absolutely.
And so when you look at the cost, I just renovated a house in an estate. I mean, I got 100,000 into it, but and I had to pay mortgage while I was holding it, but I'm gonna make a lot of the upside because I was able to sit.
Right.
Okay, so I had that advantage, but I had a lot of cost, to renovate that house. And I had mortgage payments to pay for 5 or 6 months while it's being done. So you got to take all those things into consideration where you don't have to spend the money. So you might sell your house for $250 if it's fully renovated, but you might have to spend $100,000 to renovate it.
And how much did the contractor tell you it was going to cost up front, and what did it end up costing you?
Sure.
What was the difference?
Of course.
Normally it's, oh, I didn't see that.
Oh no, there's always hidden stuff.
Right.
There's no, and
Right.
something always breaks down. It seems like, and those are all expenses. Well, let's talk about this, sort of draw out from you guys some. So the other thing I think you guys mentioned about lessons learned was also making sure the seller is the seller. What did you mean by that, Ed?
Well, sometimes I had people, like I had one years ago, and the lady called me up, and I remember when I got there, I remember the house. I was in D.C., and I knocked on the door, and this one was much younger than I met before. She was posing as a lady who passed away.
Oh, really?
Yes. So when I walked around, and I realized this is not her.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah. I had another one in Maryland about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. He had the same name, Mike Smith. The real Mike Smith was in prison.
Huh.
Yeah.
I think we're
And
gonna
another one came to me, a probate case. He forged the probate papers, and we're about to give him $350,000, and the underwriter caught that he had a physical after his death on the death certificate. And we were at settlement. He almost got his money.
Well, it's funny because one of the fellows in our office who represents title companies actually was suing someone who actually did that. They closed on a loan for a property that wasn't theirs.
Right. We called the FBI, and we got him on a sting.
Sure. That's really. Well, that goes to your very specific point about making sure the seller is the seller. Okay. So, all right, we're about at that time where we're going to run out of time. So, we've got about a minute or so left. I wanted to ask you guys to kind of each share some of your final thoughts about cash buyers. Whatever you think is important, you want to share in the final minute or so.
Yeah, like I said earlier, just be sure if there's an inspection period in there, that's a red flag. If it's more than a week or 5 days, very seldom do you need that unless it's a huge job. But on a normal house, I know in the first day when I go there, I can normally go there, I've already run my numbers, I could look at it and sign a contract that day. So look out for the subject to, that's a weasel clause, they can walk away. The homeowner is tied in, but the investor isn't. And we had one, he wanted 90 days, but he had an escape after the 90 days. So they're packed up, they're ready to go, they're moving, they don't know the investor can walk away.
Wow.
And then they're really,
Upset.
up the creek. Yeah.
Sure. Dee, how about yourself? Some final words of wisdom you want to share about cash buying process?
I think, it doesn't hurt to check the ID. Just make sure the ID matches the proof of funds that match the LLC. Everything lines up, and the proof of funds are available. And the cash buyer can actually perform and say who they are, because ultimately, as Ed mentioned, if they drag the contract out, they can assign it, they can flip it. So just shorten the period. That'll weed out a lot of what the end goal is. Are they really performing on the asset, or are they looking to assign it?
Okay.
And ultimately that'll save you a lot of headache and time at the end.
I tell you, this has been really fascinating, especially the war stories about the things you've seen. I mean, after all these years, I appreciate both you guys taking the time to help prepare for the show and for coming today and sharing your experiences. That's been very, very helpful for our viewers. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. In prior shows, we have examined the steps the executor or conservator or beneficiary should take in selling real estate. And often the real estate you are selling is older and has not been kept up, so a substantial investment of cash is required before putting it on the market. And there may be a mortgage that needs to be paid each month as well. This show this evening introduces the benefits of selling to a cash buyer. Based on what we learned in the show this evening, you should at least consider what a cash buyer would pay for your home and add that to the other costs they will pay on your behalf or that you will save from a quick sale. Compare that number with what you would net from the sale of a fully improved home that is listed with a realtor. A cash sale might make economic sense, plus be cleaner and faster. This concludes our show this evening. We hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.